Hi, I'm Mike and welcome to the workshop, and this week I'm going to show you how to handcuff dovetails like a pro, and trust me, it's a lot easier than you think it is. Let's roll that intro. So before we start cutting these dovetails, let's have a little chat about dovetails and the anatomy and the things we need to look out for when we're going to be doing them. So the most common dovetail you'll come across is the one that I have here on screen at the moment, what's known as the true dovetail. And that's where the two parts go, as it says, completely true one another. But irrelevant of what type of dovetail it is, they're made up of these two parts that you can see on screen here. The pins, which will be your face piece going across here, and the tails, which look like tails, and that's where it gets its name from. So within that grouping of pins and tails, we have this angle, obviously, that creates this interlocking. Now that angle varies depending on material. So you can see here in my notes, I have it down that a softwood carries an angle of 1:6, whereas a hardwood carries an angle of 1:8. And if I zoom in here and get one on either side, you can see that there is a difference in the steepness of this angle on the softwood compared to the hardwood. And this is because softwoods predominantly are softer materials, which means that they need more of an angle to hold them tight, whereas the hardwoods are denser. So what does this 1:6 and 1:8 angle mean? Well, it can be slightly confusing, but it is actually really simple. So essentially, in order to get this angle, what we would do is we would draw a line that's 6 long. So let's say 60 mil. Then we'll draw a line at 90 degrees to that. That is 1 long. So let's say 10 mil here. And then the line that joins those two on an angle, the hypotenuse, if you're a maths head, is going to be the angle that we're going to use here to create our angles on the side of our dovetails. The same then applies to our 1:8 for hardwood. Now dovetail markers are relatively inexpensive, so generally you don't have to work this out yourself, but it's always good to know. Moving on from true dovetails, the other major type of dovetail that you come across is what's known as a stopped or blind dovetail. So I have two examples here, which is a regular stopped dovetail, which basically means that, let's say if you were using this as the front of a drawer, when you look at the front here, you only see solid material. You don't see the heads of the pins here. And that of course can extend to as many pins as you want of different sizes and varying thicknesses to give you an effect, or even so far as this here, which is what's known as a houndstooth dovetail, where we basically cut out our dovetail, and then within that dovetail, in the pins, you have another tail. These are very effective, if not used that often. So for this video, I'm going to show you how to make the normal true dovetails, and in a later video, I'll go into detail about these more difficult stop dovetails, as I call them. But that's enough of screen time. Let's get into the workshop to live action Mike. Thank you, voiceover Mike. Now let's get down to it, shall we? So you want to cut dovetails. Well, where do you start? Well, the first place you're going to have to start is quite a lot of practice. So I have my two practice blocks that I'm going to demonstrate on this week. The next thing we're going to need is a saw. Now for dovetails, what you really need is a fine-toothed saw. Now these aren't very expensive. This one I picked up I think for about 40 quid from Amazon. But what you want is a saw with a high TPI, something above 14. Now what does that mean? Well, TPI stands for teeth per inch. So if I compare my tenon saw here and I zoom in, you can see how many teeth. There's 10 teeth across this inch here. So that's quite a wide gap. You can see the teeth are quite large. So this cuts fast, but leaves a rough finish. Compare this to my gent saw. The teeth are almost too tiny to see. There are 16 teeth per inch there. You can see how tiny those teeth are, which means they also cut very fast, but they're very tiny, which means you get a much finer cut. And that's what you want for a dovetail. You want to be able to cut as close to the line as possible, so you have to remove the smallest amount. So with this, with the thinness of this blade and with the amount of teeth that are on it, I can actually cut to my cut line. Fit these without much fuss. But you don't have to get one of these. You can get handsaws. This handsaw here has 16 points, which is 15 TPI. Again, it's quite fine. It's a good bit thicker than this saw here, but you'll be able to do it. My recommendation is if you're going to start cutting dovetails, pick yourself up a nice thin saw with about 14 or more teeth per inch. Then we need to mark. So we'll have a ruler, and as I said in the introduction here, we're going to need a dovetail marker. Now these are kind of 10 a penny. You can get them anywhere. They're relatively cheap. They're only about €5 or €6 each, and they're invaluable because you don't have to do all the calculation I talked about a few moments ago. I'm going to use this one because I like this one. With dovetails, it is vital to have a sharp edge. So what you're going to need is something to scribe a knife line. So this is actually a pen knife that I shaped into a marking knife. I've been using this as a marking knife for too long. But also you can pick up these cheap disposable little scalpels, or even one of these little breakaway craft knives. The key is it needs to be razor sharp and thin, so we can get in when we're marking our joints and cut exactly to those razor lines. And then to clean it out, we're going to need a chisel. What you want to do is base the size of your dovetails off the size of the chisels you have. So most kits only go down to about 6mm, which is this guy here. So the smallest you can make your dovetail at the base is 6mm if you have this chisel. It's always important to base joints off the tools you have to get the best results. Now I happen to have a wide selection of tools, and I have this guy, which is a 3mm chisel, which allows you to get very fine dovetails. On the saw front, you could also go for one of these, which is known as a Japanese saw, and it has far more teeth than Western saws. It's thinner, and it does really good job of cutting. But these are more on the higher end. You're looking at about 60-70 quid each. If you're going to get one, I recommend you get one that will cut both across the grain and along the grain to get the best use out of it. These are great, but for what we're doing now, my gent saw is going to be more than enough. So we know the basics of dovetails, how they're going to work. We've picked our tools. Now comes the fun part. Let's start marking these out. When I'm marking my dovetails, I like to do the pins first and then the tails second. I'll put the image back up there in the corner. But either order is valid. I'll show you why I like to do the pins first when I go to mark them. I find it handier. But we'll just start here. Working out where to put these dovetails can be tricky, but generally I find if I work it out on a piece of paper first, I'm able to see what my spacing is going to be and see if I like it. So I'm just going to mark in 10mm from either end. And again, we're working on the widest part of the pins here, so you want to make sure not to make the height of your pin smaller than the width of your chisel. So I'm going to mark in 10mm from each end, and then I'm going to mark the center line. So right, and I'm going to say I want my dovetails to be 10mm wide. So I'm going to go 10mm like that, and then the center we'll go 5 and 5. So this should mean that we end up with equally distant is correct. Equally distant dovetails. So to get our depth, what I always do, no matter what I'm doing, is I'll take the piece that I'm going to be jointing into and I line it up with the back of my material, get it perfect, and then I take a mark. And then I know that's exactly the same width. So if you watched my videos before, you're going to know what's going to come next. The important thing to getting this consistent all the way around is to come off the same faces. So I'm going to mark my face side and face edge here, and that's where I'm always going to bring my line with my ruler, with my square. So I'm just going to square this line all the way across, keeping to those faces. And if we've done that right, no matter how off square our material might be, we should end up with a perfectly jointed line, which we do. So the next thing then, we're going to mark our dovetails. So I'll bring you out a little bit and down so you can see that. This is softwood, so I'm going to select the 1:6 on my marker. And it's important to remember that this is going to be my thickest end. I have got dovetails wrong several times. I'm going to mark that, because we're going to be cutting to this, I'm going to mark it with my scalpel. Right, there's my first one done. Then I come to the other side of the marker, line it up, make sure it's nice and tight. Put that one in. And we just keep doing that for all the rest of them. Now we have them all marked. I'm going to stick our knife in that very top edge and score along the top. And we flip her over and play the same trick in reverse. Again, being very careful to make sure that I'm marking my angles so that the wide end is at the top. And now that we have our pins marked, we want to be careful and mark the areas we want to get rid of. Now, if you watched the previous video of mine, you will notice that doing this correctly is very important, otherwise you'll mess up what you're doing. So I now know what I want to get rid of. I'll take my square, line up here, and score only those areas that I have put marks on. Now, pardon me, there is a school of thought on dovetails that say that this score line is part of the construction and it's okay to score all the way across, not take out the bits like I'm doing here. But I personally feel it looks a lot cleaner when you have no visible mark lines. So I always mark up my waist first and then cut out what I don't need. And you'll get this line across much more accurate with a scalpel blade than you will with a pencil. So let's get cutting, shall we? Mechanical pencils will be the death of me. But anyway, we have a nice crisp line here where we want to cut. So what I like to do is get my chisel. Get my chisel. Just come in there, obviously I'm working towards my hand, and I just want to cut in to that line to give a little shelf for our saw. Now to cutting. So with all cutting accurately, you want to take 2 points of reference. So I start on the top, and I start tilting my saw down following that line. So I know it's square across, correct down this side, and provided I let the saw do the work, it should end up perfectly. Now, I don't know if the camera can pick it up, but I cut exactly to my lifeline there. Again, we're going to match our pins to our tails. So, to have a bit more freedom of something going wrong here, I'll just move it just a little bit. Yeah, cut down that line and check that you're down on the other side. Now those are cut. In order to make our dovetails, we need to get rid of this. So one method to do it is to work your way down like this from both sides, chipping away all the swart. I was a little bit short there on the finish zone. Like that, just cutting it from both sides and chop this material out. You get through, and then you can knock it out and work your way down to your knife line. I prefer to use a coping saw. Now this is something you can get in any hardware store. I'll cut down the middle of my dovetail, close to it, make a beeline for one corner, checking that I've not gone under the line on the far side, and then cut, leaving just a couple of mil to clean up. So I just think that's a lot easier, and we just cut the sides with the same saw we used earlier. So now that we have it at this stage, we need to clean up these edges. Now I do quite a lot of dovetails, so I've made a jig for doing this. Essentially all this jig is a perfectly straight, perfectly 90 piece of timber that I'm able to put my material in, clamp down to that exact knife line, so I can guarantee that all of these are in line and they're perfectly up and down. Now you don't need to make a jig for this. You can do the exact same thing with any perfectly straight flat piece of timber, put it on your table and clamp it down. The only recommendation I would have here is to make sure this piece of oak, make sure it's out of a hardwood, because the pressure of running your chisel up and down like this will wear into it, and eventually you'll end up with an uneven line. Now if you were interested to see me make one of these jigs, just leave a comment and I will. So important here is that we get that exactly in line with our knife line, because that's where our chisel is going to sit, and that underneath we have a piece of sacrificial material so we don't blow out the back. So this is very cowpoke, but it does the job. Now we're going to work our way back. So all we want to do is we want to keep this chisel tight to this fence. Whether you have this jig or you make one on the bench, same thing. And we're going to hold it tight to guide that chisel down the whole way, straight and flat, through to the face. If you have a bit more material like there is in this one, oh, that's good, it's all good, it broke off. Just stay away from this and make sure not to tilt the chisel that way. Now just remove the bulk of the material. I want this last pass to be about 1/2 mil. I'll sit it down then into my chisel, into the knife here, and we'll cut it just like that. So when we have that shoulder perfect, it's time to start finishing off our pins, working towards those necklines. So when doing this cleanup work, the old adage is true that less is more. Always take off less than you think you need to and work your way slowly down. Now it's very important on the next step when we're cutting the pins that we follow that to a T, because we can go a little bit wrong here on the pins, or sorry, when we're cutting the tails. We can go a little bit wrong on the pins, but we're matching the tails, so it doesn't make a difference. But the tails have to be perfect for these joints to be perfect. So I'm just going to slowly work my way back to all of those knife lines, making sure that I'm perfectly square across here, because that's what will dictate if my dovetails are right or not. And now the time has come when we must cut our pins. So what I like to do with the pins is I like to clamp my piece in a vise and get a piece of scrap, put it on my table, and perfectly line that piece up with said piece of scrap. You see there, I have my piece lined up with my piece of scrap. Then I get my tails and I line that up exactly on top of my pins and my pin material. Make sure I get that perfectly lined up, and I hold it in place and very carefully with a razor come in and mark along my top. I mark along my pins, sorry. So several light passes are better than one heavy pass for this. So you're getting in right into that corner, and that's why I recommend something with a sharp point, and you're just putting that knife line in. And no matter what we did on our pins, no matter how scraggly they are, if we follow that line, we are going to end up with a perfect match. Now zoomed in, you can see I put my blade in it here. It's probably hard to see on camera. We have our lines that we can follow now. The other reason I like doing it this way is because now I'm going to mark my waist, and with this on top here, it's very easy for me to see where I need to remove material. So in there, and in there. This is probably more important on larger dovetails. So once we have these marked, we're just going to pull the same trick in reverse. We'll get our pin stock up here, mark our width, and score all of these lines down and cut them out. So when cutting the tails, the key to getting them as good as possible is to practice getting closer and closer to that line, because the less material you have to remove with a chisel later, the greater the chance that you're going to have those perfectly tight dovetails. And eventually you'll be able to cut it exactly at that line, and they should just fit together off the saw, but that's a 1 in 10. So we're going to do the shoulders on the pins the exact same way. The only difference here is that I'm going to come in from both sides, because obviously it's thinner at one end than the other. So I start here from the thin side using my thin chisel, and then I'll flip it over and do the wider side, making sure I get everything nice and flush all the way along. So when we have that done, it's time to start fitting and very, very carefully removing material to ensure we have a perfect dovetail. I know I said it already in the video, but the key here is to remove less than you think you need to, and slowly work your way through. Because trust me, it doesn't take much to take a big swath out and make the joint too wide and not look nice. So I'll chip ahead here now till we have the final result. So after much careful shaving and fitting, you should end up with this, a really nice set of tight dovetails. But chances are the first 100 or so you do, they're going to be a bit ropey. The key to success in woodworking and joinery or anything is practice, and consistent practice, and getting better a little bit each time and not getting down on yourself when it's not perfect. There are ways of working around, you can fill gaps and people will still say, wow, that's great. So don't be hard on yourself. That is my main tip for doing this like a pro and improving your woodworking skills, is learn, but don't be hard on yourself. A man who never made a mistake never made anything. But if you want to make these as tight as possible and as perfect as you can, my main tips are this. Get that saw with the really fine teeth, like I said, 14 to 16 TPI. That means you can cut closer to your line and you have to do less fettling. And eventually you'll be able to cut it so that you have to do nearly no fettling. You'll be able to cut that line and it'll just about slide together. And when you're doing both the pins and the tails, remove less material than you think you need to remove. I cannot tell you the amount of times I've been fitting and I'm thinking, oh, that needs quite a bit now. Take them out to chisel and it create a huge gap. So always think, I need to take this much off, then take half of that and fit it and test it and fit it and test it. And eventually you'll be able to get in there and get them pretty much so bang on. So if you've enjoyed this series, so if you've enjoyed this video and you want to see more of my tips and tricks as a long time woodworker and how to do joinery like this, like let's say maybe a mortise and tenon. I started with the dovetail because the dovetail is a nice impact piece and it's one of the most commonly used joints. But the most common is the mortise and tenon. Now I've used it a lot in my videos, but if you want to see a more in-depth mortise and tenon video, put it in the comments and I'll do it for you. So thank you for staying to the end of the video. Like, subscribe, share and all that fun stuff. And absolutely do try this at home.